The rain hammered against the windows of my tiny bakery like angry fists, each drop exploding against the glass with a violence that made me flinch. I should have closed an hour ago, but the batch of tomorrow's bread was still rising and I couldn't afford to waste even a single loaf. Not when rent was due next week and my bank account was running as dry as yesterday's croissants. Lightning split the sky, illuminating the empty street outside in stark, ghostly white. In that brief moment, I saw him. A figure hunched against the storm, tall and broad-shouldered, stumbling down the sidewalk like he was fighting the wind itself. His dark hair was plastered to his skull, and his expensive-looking coat, even from this distance, I could tell it was expensive, hung heavy with water. He moved with purpose despite the weather, but there was something desperate in the way he pressed forward, something that made my chest tighten with unexpected concern. Another flash of lightning, and he was closer. Close enough that I could see the sharp line of his jaw, the way his hands were clenched into fists at his sides. Close enough to notice that he kept glancing over his shoulder like he expected someone to emerge from the shadows behind him. That's when he looked up and saw me through the window. Our eyes met through the rain-streaked glass, and something electric passed between us that had nothing to do with the storm raging outside. His eyes were dark, so dark they seemed to absorb the warm light spilling from my bakery, and in them I saw something that made my breath catch. Not just exhaustion or cold, but a bone-deep weariness that spoke of dangers I never had to face. He stopped walking. Just stood there in the middle of the storm, water streaming down his face, staring at me like I was some kind of miracle he hadn't expected to find. The rational part of my brain, the part that had kept me safe and solitary for 28 years, screamed at me to look away, to turn off the lights and pretend I hadn't seen him. Instead, I found myself walking to the door. My hand trembled on the deadbolt, and I could hear Mama's voice in my head, thick with her Colombian accent. "Elena, Mia, never trust a stranger in a storm." That's when the desperate ones come out. But looking at this man, really looking at him, I didn't see desperation. I saw someone who was soaked to the bone and shivering, yes, but there was something else. A quiet dignity in the way he held himself, even drenched and clearly in some kind of trouble. Thunder crashed overhead as I turned the lock and pulled the door open. The wind immediately tried to rip it from my hands, sending a spray of cold rain across my face and the clean linoleum floor I'd mopped just an hour ago. "Are you all right?" I had to shout to be heard over the storm. My voice sounded smaller than usual, almost lost in the howling wind, but he heard me. His eyes, God, those eyes focused on my face with an intensity that made my knees feel suddenly unsteady. For a moment, he didn't answer. Just stood there studying me like he was trying to memorize every detail of my face. I became hyper-aware of how I must look, flowers still dusting my dark hair. My simple white t-shirt probably showing more than it should in the bakery's warm light. My jeans bearing the evidence of a long day's work. Nothing special, nothing that should warrant the kind of attention he was giving me. Double quotes, his voice was deeper than I'd expected, with a slight rasp that spoke of exhaustion. "I don't want to trouble you, miss. He glanced back over his shoulder again, that same nervous gesture I noticed before, and my heart clenched with sympathy. "You're soaked," I said, making a decision that would change everything. "Come inside before you catch pneumonia." I stepped back, holding the door open wider, and after a moment's hesitation, he stepped across my threshold and into my world. The difference was immediate. Inside my small bakery, with its warm yellow walls and the comforting smell of fresh bread still lingering in the air, he looked even more imposing. Water dripped steadily from his coat onto my clean floor, creating a small puddle that reflected the overhead lights like a mirror. He had to be at least 6'3", maybe taller, and even soaked and obviously cold. There was something about the way he carried himself that spoke of power, of a man accustomed to being in control. "Thank you," he said quietly, and I noticed he had an accent not heavy, but they're in the way he shaped certain words. Italian, maybe. "I know this is unusual. Unusual is letting someone stand outside in a storm when I have a perfectly good heater," I replied, pushing the door closed against the wind and turning the deadbolt with hands that were steadier than I felt. "Are you hurt?" He shook his head, but I noticed how he favored his left side slightly, how his breathing seemed just a little too careful. "Just cold." I believed the cold part. His lips had a blue tinge that made my chest tighten with worry, and I could see the way he was fighting not to shiver. "But hurt?" I had my doubts. "Wait here," I said, already moving toward the back room where I kept emergency supplies. I have towels and I can make fresh coffee. The good stuff, not the stuff that's been sitting on the burner all day. You don't have to. I want to. I interrupted, surprising myself with the firmness in my voice. Besides, Mama always said that helping someone in a storm brings good karma. And Lord knows I could use some good karma. That earned me something that might have been a smile. Though it was gone so quickly, I might have imagined it. Your mama sounds like a smart woman. She was. The words came out softer than I intended, carrying more weight than a stranger needed to know about. But something about this man, about the way he'd said it, without prying, without pushing for details, made me want to share that small piece of my heart. I hurried to the back room, my mind racing as I gathered supplies. What was I doing? I didn't know this man from Adam, and here I was, alone in my bakery at 9:30 at night, playing Good Samaritan to someone who might be running from. What kind of person wandered the streets during a storm like this, looking over their shoulder like they expected trouble to follow them? But when I returned with an armload of clean towels and saw him standing exactly where I'd left him, not moving around, not looking through my things, not making himself at home uninvited, some of my anxiety eased. He'd removed his soaked coat and hung it carefully on the hook by the door, and I could see now that underneath he wore a dress shirt that probably cost more than I made in a week. Even wet and wrinkled, the fabric looked expensive, and his pants definitely tailored. Here, I said, offering him the towels. Our fingers brushed as he took them, and I felt a jolt of awareness that had nothing to do with static electricity. His skin was cold, but his touch was gentle, careful, like he was afraid he might break something delicate. Thank you, miss. Elena, I said, then immediately wondered if I should have given him a fake name. But it was too late now, and something about the way he repeated it, like he was testing how it felt on his tongue, made me glad I'd been honest. Elena, he said again, and I liked the way my name sounded in his voice, shaped by that subtle accent. I'm Marco. It fit him somehow, classic and strong. I watched as he dried his hair with one of the towels. The simple action somehow graceful despite his obvious exhaustion. Dry, his hair was thick and black, with just a hint of wave that made my fingers itch to touch it. His features were sharp high cheekbones, a straight nose that looked like it had been broken once and healed perfectly, and that jawline that could cut glass. But it was his eyes that held me captive. Dark brown, almost black, framed by long lashes that most women would kill for, and holding depths that suggested he'd seen far more of the world than someone his age, early 30s, maybe should have. Let me get that coffee started, I said, forcing myself to look away before I did something embarrassing like stare at him all night. How do you take it? Black is fine, he said, then paused. Actually, however you normally drink it. I don't want to be any more trouble than I already am. I almost smiled at that. Cream and sugar it is then. I have a serious sweet tooth. Occupational hazard of owning a bakery. I busied myself with the coffee machine, hyper-aware of his presence behind me as he continued to dry off. The familiar routine of grinding beans and measuring water helped calm my nerves, though I couldn't shake the feeling that everything had shifted somehow. That the world I'd known an hour ago, quiet, predictable, safe, was never going to be the same. You own this place? Marco's voice was closer than I expected, and I turned to find him standing just a few feet away, looking around the bakery with genuine interest. For 3 years now, I said, pride warming my voice despite everything. It's not much, but it's mine. It's beautiful, he said, and the sincerity in his voice made my cheeks warm. You can tell it's been cared for. He was right. Every inch of my bakery had been carefully considered, from the warm yellow walls I'd painted myself to the mismatched vintage chairs I'd found at estate sales and restored with my own hands. The display cases gleamed, filled with tomorrow's pastries that I'd finished just before the storm hit. Handwritten chalkboard menus listed the daily specials in my careful script, and fresh flowers daisies this week, because they were cheerful and cheap sat in mason jars on each of the 6 small tables. My mama always said a business should feel like home, I said, watching the coffee drip steadily into the pot. People can taste love in the food, she used to tell me. They can feel care in the atmosphere. She was right, Marco said quietly. This place, it has warmth, peace. There was something in the way he said peace that made me look at him more closely. Like it was something he hadn't experienced in a long time, something he'd maybe forgotten existed. The coffee maker beeped, saving me from having to figure out how to respond to the sudden vulnerability in his voice. I poured 2 steaming mugs, adding cream and sugar to both out of habit. then handed one to Marco. Again, that brief touch of fingers, that spark of awareness that made my pulse skip. "Thank you," he said, wrapping his large hands around the mug like it was a precious thing. "For this, for ... He gestured around the bakery. "For opening your door to a stranger. My mama also used to say that there are no strangers, only friends we haven't met yet," I replied, then felt heat rise in my cheeks. Sorry, I quote her a lot. She had a saying for everything. Had? The question was gentle, not intrusive, but I found myself answering anyway. She died 2 years ago, cancer. The words still hurt to say, but somehow telling Marco felt natural, like confessing to an old friend rather than a man I'd known for all of 20 minutes. "I'm sorry," he said, and the simple words carried more genuine sympathy than all the elaborate condolences I'd received from people who'd known her for years. "She sounds like she was an extraordinary woman." She was. I took a sip of my coffee, letting the warmth and caffeine steady me. "She taught me how to bake, how to run a business, how to be strong." "She did a good job," Marco said quietly. "It takes strength to open your door to someone like me." Someone like him? What did that mean? I studied his face, looking for clues, but his expression had shuttered again. That careful blankness I'd noticed when he first walked in. "Someone like what?" I asked. "Someone who's cold and wet and needed help?" He looked at me for a long moment, something unreadable flickering in his dark eyes. "Yes," he said finally. "Something like that." But I had the feeling that wasn't what he'd meant at all. We drank our coffee in a silence that should have been awkward but somehow wasn't. Outside, the storm continued to rage, rain lashing the windows with relentless fury. Inside, my small bakery felt like a cocoon, warm and safe and separate from the chaos beyond. I found myself stealing glances at Marco as he sat at one of my small tables, his large frame somehow fitting into the delicate chair without looking ridiculous. He was beautiful, I realized with a start. Not handsome in the traditional sense, his features were too sharp, too intense for that. But there was something compelling about the way he carried himself, something magnetic in the careful way he moved, like he was constantly aware of his own strength and consciously keeping it in check. "The storm should pass soon," I said when the silence stretched too long. "These late-season squalls usually blow through pretty quickly." Marco nodded, but he didn't look particularly eager for the weather to clear. If anything, he seemed content to sit in my warm bakery, cradling his coffee and watching me with those dark eyes that seemed to see too much. "What do you do?" I asked, then immediately felt stupid for the mundane question. But normal conversation felt safer than the charged silence that had been building between us. "I'm in import and export," he said after a brief hesitation. "Family business." The pause before his answer made me think there was more to it than that, but I didn't push. Everyone was entitled to their privacy, and it wasn't like I'd been completely forthcoming either. I had mentioned that the bakery was barely breaking even, that I worked 14-hour days just to keep the lights on, that I lay awake most nights wondering how I was going to make next month's rent. "Must be interesting work," I said politely. "It has its moments." Another one of those almost smiles, gone before I could be sure I'd really seen it. "But your work is more important. People need bread, need sweetness in their lives. You create something beautiful every day." The unexpected compliment made my cheeks warm again. "It's just baking." "No," Marco said, his voice serious. "It's not just anything. You feed people. You nourish them. You create a place where they can feel ... safe." That word again. Safe. Like it was something he thought about a lot, something that mattered to him in a way that seemed almost personal. "Is that why you came in here?" I asked impulsively. "Because it felt safe?" Marco went very still, his coffee mug halfway to his lips. For a moment, I thought I'd overstepped, pushed too hard into territory he didn't want to explore. But then he set down his mug and looked at me with an expression so raw, so unguarded, that it took my breath away. "Yes," he said simply. It did. Thunder crashed overhead again, so close it rattled the windows and made me jump. Marco's hand moved slightly, like he'd been about to reach for me, but he caught himself and pulled back. The gesture was so quick I might have imagined it, but the thought that he'd wanted to comfort me made something warm unfurl in my chest. "You don't have anywhere else to go tonight, do you?" I asked quietly. The question hung in the air between us, loaded with implications I wasn't sure I was ready to examine. But looking at Marco, really looking at him, I could see the exhaustion carved into the lines around his eyes. The careful way he held himself that spoke of someone who'd been running on adrenaline for too long. I have places, he said carefully. But none of them are ... safe, not tonight. Then stay, I heard myself say. I have a couch upstairs in my apartment. It's not much, but it's warm and dry. Marco stared at me like I just offered him the moon. Elena, you don't understand. I can't. You don't know what you're offering. I'm offering a dry place to sleep to someone who obviously needs it, I said, surprised by my own certainty. That's all. But even as I said it, I knew it wasn't true. This wasn't just about charity, wasn't just about my mama's teachings about helping strangers. Something about Marco called to me in a way I didn't understand, made me want to shelter him from whatever storm had driven him to my door, literal or otherwise. It could be dangerous, he said quietly. Having me here? More dangerous than a woman living alone above her business in this neighborhood? I countered. Because I do that every night and I'm still here. Marco was quiet for a long moment, studying my face like he was trying to read my soul. Outside, the storm seemed to be intensifying, if that was possible, the wind howling like something alive and angry. Why? He asked finally. Why would you trust me? It was a fair question, and I wasn't sure I had a good answer. By any reasonable standard, I was being incredibly stupid. I didn't know this man, didn't know what kind of trouble he might be running from or what dangers he might bring to my door. But sometimes Mama had always said you had to trust your instincts. And every instinct I had was telling me that Marco, despite his obvious secrets, despite the way he kept glancing toward the door like he expected someone to kick it down, was not a threat to me. I don't know, I said honestly. But I do. Marco closed his eyes briefly, like my words had affected him more than he wanted to admit. When he opened them again, there was something different in his expression. Not just gratitude, but something deeper and more complex. Thank you, he said, and his voice was rougher than before. You have no idea what this means to me. I did know, though. I could see it in the way his shoulders had relaxed slightly, in the way some of the tension had left his jaw. Whatever he was running from, whoever he was hiding from, the idea of a safe place to rest even for one night clearly meant everything to him. Come on, I said, standing and rinsing out my coffee mug. Let me show you upstairs. I led him through the back of the bakery, past the industrial ovens and mixing stations, to the narrow staircase that led to my apartment. It wasn't much, just a studio with a tiny kitchen, a bathroom not much bigger than a closet, and a living area that barely held my couch, coffee table, and small television. But it was clean and warm, and it was home. The couch pulls out, I said, suddenly self-conscious about my modest living space. Sheets are in that closet, and there are extra blankets if you get cold. Marco stood in the middle of my small living room, looking around with that same careful attention he'd paid to the bakery downstairs. But instead of judgment in his expression, I saw something like wonder, like he couldn't quite believe he was here. Elena, he said, turning to face me. I need you to know, tomorrow things might be different. There might be... trouble? I finished when he seemed to struggle for words. He nodded grimly. Yes, if that happens, I want you to stay inside. Keep the bakery closed. Don't answer the door for anyone except the police. A chill ran down my spine that had nothing to do with the storm still raging outside. What kind of trouble? The kind you don't want to be involved in, Marco said. The kind that's my problem, not yours. I wanted to ask more questions, wanted to understand what I was potentially getting myself into. But something in his expression warned me off. Instead, I nodded. Okay, I said. I'll be careful, relief flickered across his features. Good, and Elena. He stepped closer, and I caught a hint of his scent, something expensive and masculine that made my pulse quicken. Whatever happens tomorrow, whatever you might hear about me... Remember tonight. Remember that I would never ever hurt you. The intensity in his voice, the way he was looking at me like he was trying to memorize my face, sent another shiver through me. But this one wasn't fear, it was something else entirely, something that made my breath catch and my heart race. I'll remember, I promised. Marco nodded once, satisfied, then stepped back. Sleep well, Elena Martinez, I started. I never told him my last name. But before I could ask how he knew it, he turned away, already pulling pillows from the couch with efficient, economical movements that suggested he'd slept in worse places than this. Good night, Marco, I said softly, then retreated to my bedroom, closing the door behind me with hands that trembled slightly. I lay awake for a long time that night, listening to the storm rage outside and the quiet sounds of Marco settling on my couch. I should have been terrified. I was harboring a stranger, a man who'd all but admitted he was in serious trouble, someone who somehow knew my full name without being told. But instead of fear, I felt something else entirely. Something warm and protective and completely irrational. Whatever storm Marco was weathering, literal or metaphorical, I was glad I could offer him shelter. Even if it was only for one night. I must have finally dozed off sometime near dawn because I woke to the sound of my alarm and pale morning sunlight streaming through my bedroom window. The storm had passed, leaving behind the fresh, washed smell that always followed heavy rain. For a moment, I lay still, wondering if last night had been a dream. But then I heard the soft sounds of movement from the living room and knew it had been real. Marco was still here. I dressed quickly in jeans and a clean t-shirt, ran a brush through my hair, and crept quietly to the living room. The couch had been folded back up, the sheets neatly folded and stacked on the coffee table. Marco was standing at my small window, fully dressed, looking out at the street below with an intensity that made my stomach clench. "Good morning," I said softly, not wanting to startle him. He turned, and I was struck again by how handsome he was. In the morning light, I could see details I'd missed the night before, the faint scar that ran along his left temple, the way his shirt stretched across broad shoulders, the fact that despite sleeping on my lumpy couch, he looked perfectly put together. "Good morning," he replied, but there was something tense in his voice that hadn't been there the night before. "Elena, I need to ask you something, and I need you to tell me the truth." My pulse quickened. "Okay. Do you see anything unusual outside? Any cars that weren't there yesterday? Any people who don't belong?" I moved to the window and peered down at my quiet street. It looked the same as always. Mrs. Chun from the flower shop next door sweeping her sidewalk. Old Mr. Rodriguez walking his ancient beagle. The usual morning routine of a working-class neighborhood slowly coming to life. "It looks normal," I said. "Why? What are you looking for?" But even as I asked the question, I saw them. Black SUVs. 3 of them parked at strategic points along my block. They were subtle about it, not directly in front of my bakery, not obviously menacing. But they were there, dark and expensive, and completely out of place in my neighborhood of beat-up Hondas and ancient pickup trucks. "Oh," I breathed, my heart starting to race. "Those weren't there yesterday." Marco's jaw tightened. "No," he said grimly. "They weren't." I turned to look at him, suddenly understanding that whatever trouble he'd brought to my door was bigger than I'd imagined. "Marco, what's going on? Who are you really?" He was quiet for a long moment, his dark eyes searching my face like he was trying to decide how much truth I could handle. "I'm someone who should never have put you in this position," he said finally. "Someone who cares more about your safety than his own, which is a problem because right now, those 2 things are mutually exclusive." Before I could ask what he meant, there was a knock at my front door. Not the friendly rap of Mrs. Chun or the tentative tap of a customer trying to see if I was open early. This was authoritative, demanding. The kind of knock that expected to be answered immediately. Marco went perfectly still, every muscle in his body tensing like a predator preparing to strike. "Elena," he said quietly, his voice carrying an authority that made me want to obey without question. "I need you to go into your bedroom, lock the door. And don't come out until I tell you to. But now." The single word was spoken softly, but with such absolute command that I found myself backing toward my bedroom before I consciously decided to move. The knocking came again, more insistent this time. And underneath it, I could hear voices, men's voices, speaking in what sounded like Italian. "Elena," Marco's voice stopped me at my bedroom door. I turned to look at him, and the expression on his face made my breath catch. Gone was any trace of the vulnerable man who'd stumbled into my bakery last night. This Marco was someone else entirely, someone dangerous. Someone powerful, someone who looked like he could handle whatever was waiting on the other side of my door. "Whatever happens," he said, "remember what I told you last night. I would never hurt you." Then he was moving toward the stairs, and I was closing my bedroom door with trembling hands, my heart pounding so hard I was sure it could be heard through the walls. From downstairs, I heard the sound of my front door opening, followed by a conversation in rapid Italian that I couldn't understand, but that sounded heated, urgent. Male voices, at least 3 of them, maybe more. Marco's voice among them, calm and controlled despite whatever was happening. I pressed my ear to my bedroom door, straining to hear, but the conversation was too quick, too foreign. All I could make out were fragments, names, maybe, or places. One phrase that sounded like a question, repeated several times with increasing intensity. Then, suddenly, silence. I held my breath, waiting for what? Gunshots? Fighting? Instead, I heard footsteps on my stairs, heavy and purposeful. More than one person. A soft knock on my bedroom door made me jump so hard I nearly fell over. Elena? Marco's voice, but different now, formal, careful. You can come out now. I opened the door with shaking hands to find Marco standing in my tiny living room along with two other men in expensive suits. They were both dark-haired and olive-skinned, clearly cut from the same cloth as Marco, but where his presence was magnetic, theirs was merely intimidating. Elena, Marco said, his voice gentler now. I'd like you to meet my cousin Anthony and my business associate Vincent. Anthony was younger than Marco, maybe late 20s, with a quick smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. Vincent was older, graying at the temples with the kind of stillness that suggested he was very good at violence. Miss Martinez, Anthony said with a slight bow. My cousin speaks very highly of your hospitality. I looked between the three men, noting the way they stood loose but ready, like they were accustomed to trouble finding them. Are you all in the import business? That earned me another one of Anthony's almost smiles. Something like that. Elena, Marco stepped forward and I could see conflict warring in his dark eyes. These men are here to make sure you're safe. What happened last night, my being here? It might have attracted the wrong kind of attention. What kind of attention? I demanded, finally finding my voice. And don't give me another vague non-answer. I think I've earned the right to know what's going on. The three men exchanged glances, some kind of silent communication passing between them. It was Vincent who finally spoke, his voice carrying a slight accent that was definitely Brooklyn, possibly with Italian roots. Miss Martinez, your friend here is what you might call a person of interest to some very unpleasant people. By helping him, you may have inadvertently put yourself in their crosshairs. What Vincent is trying to say, Anthony added with a glare at his companion, is that Marco has enemies. And sometimes those enemies aren't too particular about who gets hurt in the crossfire. I looked at Marco, whose jaw was tight with what looked like self-directed anger. What did you do? I was born, he said simply, into a family that has very old disagreements with other families. Understanding dawned slowly, like puzzle pieces clicking into place. The expensive clothes, the way other people defer to him, the guards outside, the casual mention of enemies, Your mafia, I said. It wasn't a question. Marco nodded once, his eyes never leaving my face. Yes, I should have been terrified. Should have demanded they all leave immediately, should have called the police the moment I understood what I was dealing with. Instead, I found myself thinking about the way Marco had looked at my bakery the night before, like it was something precious. The way he'd spoken about safety and peace like they were foreign concepts. The careful gentleness with which he'd accepted my hospitality. Are you the boss? I asked. Another nod. Yes. Of what exactly? The Salvatore family, Anthony answered when Marco remained silent. We control most of the legitimate business interests in this part of Boston, along with some less legitimate enterprises, and someone wants to hurt you. I said to Marco, someone who might come after me because I helped you. The Torino family has been trying to move into our territory for months, Vincent explained. Last night, they made their most direct attempt yet. If Marco hadn't taken shelter here, if he'd been caught in the open. He didn't finish the sentence, but he didn't need to. The implication was clear enough. So what happens now? I asked. Do I just go about my business and hope they don't decide I'm a threat? You're under our protection, Marco said firmly. For as long as necessary. I looked around my small apartment at these three dangerous men standing in my living space like they belonged there, and tried to process what my life had become in the space of 12 hours. I don't want your protection, I said quietly. The words seemed to hit Marco physically. He stepped back slightly, something wounded flickering in his dark eyes. Elena, I want to understand, I continued. I want to know what I'm dealing with, what the risks are, what my options are. I want the truth, not just decisions made for me by people who think they know what's best. Silence stretched between us. broken only by the distant sounds of my neighborhood waking up car doors slamming, dogs barking, the normal symphony of a Thursday morning that felt anything but normal now. She has a point, Anthony said finally. If she's going to be involved, she deserves to know what she's involved in. She's not going to be involved, Marcos said sharply. She's going to be protected until the situation resolves itself. And how long might that take? I asked. Days? Weeks? Months? Because I have a business to run, bills to pay, a life that doesn't stop just because you have family drama. Vincent actually cracked a smile at that. Family drama. I like her. This isn't a joke, Marcos snapped, but his anger seemed directed more at the situation than at me. Elena, you have no idea what these people are capable of. What they'll do to get to me. Then tell me, I said. Explain it to me like I'm an adult who can make her own decisions. Marco ran a hand through his dark hair, frustration clear in every line of his body. The Torinos want what we have. Our territory, our businesses, our influence. For months, they've been testing our boundaries, trying to find weaknesses. Last night, they decided to stop being subtle. Someone leaked information about Marco's schedule, Anthony added. They were waiting for him when he left a business meeting downtown. If he hadn't managed to lose them in the storm they would have killed me, Marco finished bluntly, and then moved forward with their plans to take over our operations. But you got away, I said. And now? Now they know they failed, Vincent said. Which means they'll try again, probably sooner rather than later. And they'll be looking for any weakness they can exploit, including anyone who might be important to Marco, Anthony said gently. The implication hung in the air like smoke. Anyone important to Marco? Was that what it was now? Based on one night of kindness, one simple act of human decency? I barely know him, I protested. Doesn't matter, Marco said grimly. You helped me. In their eyes, that makes you a potential asset or a potential threat. Either way, you're now on their radar. I sank down onto my couch, suddenly feeling very tired. This was insane. 24 hours ago, my biggest worry had been whether I could afford to replace the aging mixer in my bakery. Now I was apparently caught in the middle of some kind of mob war through no fault of my own. What are my options? I asked. You don't have any, Marco said immediately. You're under our protection now. That's not negotiable. Everything is negotiable, I shot back. This is my life we're talking about. And I'm trying to keep you alive. Marco's voice rose slightly, the first real emotion I'd heard from him since his men had arrived. Do you understand that? They will kill you without a second thought if they think it will hurt me or help them. Your best chance, your only chance, is to let us protect you. By hiding me away somewhere? By making me disappear? If necessary, yes. I stood up, anger finally overriding the surreal shock of the situation. No, absolutely not. I won't be driven out of my home, away from my business, because of your family's problems. Elena, no, I said again, more firmly. I don't care how dangerous these people are. This bakery is all I have left of my mother, all I have left of the life we built together. I won't abandon it. Marco's expression softened slightly. I understand that this place means something to you, but you don't understand, I interrupted. You couldn't possibly understand. You have family, you have an empire, you have people who depend on you and believe in you. This bakery is my family. These four walls and the people who come here every day for their morning coffee and their birthday cakes and their comfort food when life gets hard. I won't let your enemies take that away from me. The room fell silent again. Anthony and Vincent were watching this exchange like spectators at a tennis match, their expressions carefully neutral. Marco was staring at me like I'd just spoken in a foreign language. You're willing to risk your life for a bakery? He asked quietly. I'm willing to risk my life for my life, I corrected. For the right to live it on my own terms, even if those terms aren't the safest ones available. Something shifted in Marco's expression, surprise, maybe, or a reluctant kind of admiration. You're more stubborn than I thought. I'm a small business owner in a tough neighborhood, I said. Stubborn is a job requirement. Vincent cleared his throat. There might be a middle ground here. Both Marco and I turned to look at him. We establish a perimeter, he continued. Discreet protection around the bakery and the block. Elena continues her normal routine, but with safeguards in place. If the Torinos make a move, we're ready for them. That's not good enough, Marco said immediately. Too many variables, too many ways for something to go wrong. But it's better than trying to force her into hiding when she's already made it clear she won't cooperate, Anthony pointed out pragmatically. A willing subject is always easier to protect than an unwilling one. I looked between the three men, seeing the family resemblance not just in their features, but in their mannerisms, the way they communicated in half sentences and shared glances, the easy familiarity of people who'd been making life and death decisions together for years. What would that look like exactly? I asked Vincent. This discreet protection? Guards in unmarked cars at regular intervals around the block, he explained. Someone inside the bakery during business hours, posing as a customer or employee. Modified routines for opening and closing. Basic security measures. For how long? Until the situation with the Torinos resolves itself, Anthony said. Could be days, could be weeks. And what does that resolution look like? I asked, though I had a feeling I knew the answer. The three men exchanged another one of those loaded glances. It looks like the Torinos deciding that continuing this conflict isn't in their best interests, Marco said carefully. Or we make that decision for them, Vincent said bluntly. I sat back down, my head spinning. This was really happening. I was really discussing battle plans with actual mobsters in my living room on a Thursday morning, like it was the most normal thing in the world. I need coffee, I announced. And breakfast. And time to think about this without three intimidating men staring at me. Elena, Marco started, but I held up a hand. I'm going downstairs to open my bakery, I said. Because that's what I do every morning, and I'm not letting fear change that. You three can figure out your protection details or whatever, but I have croissants to bake and customers to serve. I stood up and headed for the stairs, then paused and looked back at Marco. For what it's worth, I said. I don't regret letting you in last night. Whatever happens next, I'm glad I was there when you needed help. Something raw and vulnerable flickered across his features. Elena, but if we're going to do this, I continued, if I'm going to accept your protection and let you turn my life upside down, then I want some things in return. What things? Honesty, I said. No more vague answers or half-truths. If I'm risking my life, I deserve to know exactly what I'm risking it for. Marco nodded slowly. Agreed, and respect, I added, for my decisions, my business, my life. I'm not some helpless victim who needs to be managed. I'm a partner in this, whether any of us likes it or not. Understood. Good. I started down the stairs, then called back over my shoulder. And Marco? Next time you need a place to lay low, maybe pick somewhere that serves terrible coffee. It'll be easier for everyone involved. I heard Anthony's surprised laughter follow me down the stairs. And despite everything, the danger, the uncertainty, the complete insanity of my new reality, I found myself smiling. Downstairs in my bakery, I went through the familiar motions of my morning routine. Starting the ovens, checking the day's orders, mixing dough for the lunch pastries. The normalcy of it helped center me, reminded me that no matter what chaos was happening upstairs, I still had bread to bake and customers to serve. I was just pulling the first batch of croissants from the oven when I heard footsteps on the stairs. Marco appeared in the doorway to my kitchen, looking somehow both more relaxed and more dangerous than he had upstairs. Your friends leave? I asked, not looking up from arranging pastries in the display case. They're around, Marco said. Setting up the perimeter Vincent mentioned. I moved to the coffee station, starting my usual 3-pot morning brew. So this is really happening. It's really happening. Marco moved closer. And I caught that scent again, expensive cologne mixed with something uniquely him. Elena, I want you to know what you said upstairs about honesty and respect. I meant what I agreed to. I finally looked at him, noting the way the morning light streaming through the bakery windows highlighted the sharp angles of his face. Good, because I have questions. I figured you might. The Torino family, I began, wiping down the counter with more force than necessary. How long has this been going on? The conflict? About 6 months actively, but the underlying tension goes back generations. Our families have never gotten along, but until recently, there was enough territory for everyone. What changed? Marco was quiet for a moment, watching me work with an intensity that made my skin tingle. Leadership. Old man Torino died last year and his son Carlo took over. He's more ambitious than his father was. Less willing to respect boundaries. And more willing to resort to violence? Much more. I nodded, processing this. What exactly do you do, Marco? In your family business? We own legitimate businesses throughout Boston, he said. Restaurants, construction companies, waste management. We also provide certain services that the legitimate world can't or won't provide. Such as? Marco's jaw tightened slightly. Protection, loans, dispute resolution. I had a feeling there was more to it than that, but I also sensed I was approaching the limits of what he was willing to discuss. Fair enough. We barely knew each other despite the strange intimacy of the last 12 hours. And you're the head of all this? Yes, my father died 3 years ago and I took over. There was pain in those simple words, carefully hidden but unmistakable. I'm sorry, I said softly. That must have been difficult. It was complicated, Marco admitted. Taking over a family business is always challenging. Taking over a family like ours when you're barely 30 and half the men you're supposed to lead remember changing your diapers ... double quotes. But you did it. I did what I had to do. His voice was matter of fact, but I heard the weight behind it. Just like you did when you took over this place after your mother died. The parallel hadn't occurred to me, but he was right. We'd both inherited responsibility before we were ready. Both had to find ways to honor our family's legacies while making them our own. The difference, I said, is that if I mess up, I lose money. If you mess up ... people die, Marco finished quietly. Yes, the stakes are somewhat higher. The front door chimed, signaling my first customer of the day, Mrs. Chun from the flower shop, right on schedule for her morning cappuccino and blueberry scone. Elena, dear, she called in her cheerful voice. How are you this beautiful morning? Good, Mrs. Chun, I called back, moving to the front counter. The usual? Please, make it extra hot today. This old bones don't like the dampness after the storm. I went about preparing her order, hyper-aware of Marco standing behind me in the kitchen doorway. Mrs. Chun was chattering about the weather and her plans for the day, but I could see her eyes flicking curiously toward Marco. Mrs. Chun, I said as I handed her the cappuccino, this is my friend Marco, he's visiting from out of town. Marco stepped forward with a charming smile that transformed his entire face. Pleasure to meet you, Mrs. Chun. Elena speaks of you often. Mrs. Chun preened slightly under the attention. Oh, you flatterer. Elena, you didn't tell me you had such a handsome friend coming to visit. It was a surprise. I said, which was certainly true enough, Mrs. Chun paid for her order and headed for the door, but paused to look back at Marco. You take good care of our Elena, she said seriously. She works too hard, that one. Needs someone to look after her. I'll do my best, Marco replied, and there was something in his tone that made Mrs. Chun nod with satisfaction. After she left, I turned to Marco with raised eyebrows. Visiting from out of town? It seems simpler than the truth, he said with a slight smile. Though I think she approved of me. Mrs. Chun approves of everyone who's polite and buys flowers, I said. Don't let it go to your head. But despite my light tone, I found myself thinking about what she'd said. Someone to look after me. I'd been taking care of myself for so long that I'd forgotten what it felt like to have someone else worry about my well-being. The thought should have been annoying. I prided myself on my independence, but instead it was oddly comforting. The morning continued with its usual rhythm of customers and coffee and casual conversation. Marco stayed in the background, observing but not interfering, and I found myself relaxing despite the surreal circumstances. Whatever else he was good at reading situations, at knowing when to step forward and when to remain invisible. It wasn't until almost 11 o'clock that I saw the first sign of the protection Vincent had promised. A man in a casual jacket and jeans ordered a large coffee and a newspaper, then settled at one of my corner tables with a clear view of both the front door and the street outside. He looked ordinary enough, middle-aged, slightly rumpled, like any number of contractors or delivery drivers who stopped in for caffeine during their workday. Except I'd never seen him before, and in a neighborhood bus, you've got to know the regulars pretty quickly. Friend of yours? I murmured to Marco as I refilled his coffee cup. He glanced toward the corner table. Vincent's people are very good at blending in. How many of them are there? Enough, Marco said simply. The non-answer should have frustrated me, but somehow it didn't. I was beginning to understand that in Marco's world, information was shared on a need-to-know basis, and the less I knew about specific security details, the safer everyone would be. The lunch rush started earlier than usual. Maybe because word was getting around that I had an unusually attractive man working behind my counter. Marco had somehow acquired an apron and was helping me serve customers with the kind of natural charm that had my female clientele practically swooning. "You're good at this," I observed during a brief lull between orders. "I've worked in restaurants," he said. "Family businesses, remember? You learn every aspect of the operation. Even the Mafia Don does dishes?" "Even the Mafia Don does dishes," he confirmed with a smile that made my heart skip. "Though we don't usually call it that. What do you call it?" "The family," he said simply. "Or the organization, if we're being formal." I was about to ask another question when the front door chimed again. I looked up to see a man I didn't recognize, tall, thin, with dark hair and an expensive coat that looked out of place in my neighborhood. The temperature in the bakery seemed to drop 10 degrees. Marco went completely still beside me, his entire body tensing in a way that reminded me that underneath the charm and the gentle manners, he was someone very dangerous. The stranger approached the counter with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Excuse me," he said, his voice carrying a slight accent that might have been Italian. "I'm looking for someone. Maybe you've seen him?" He pulled out a photograph and placed it on the counter. It was Marco, clearly taken with a long-range lens, getting out of a black car in front of what looked like an upscale restaurant. "I'm sorry," I said, proud of how steady my voice sounded. "I haven't seen this person. Would you like to order something?" The man studied my face for a long moment as if trying to decide whether I was telling the truth. "Perhaps your assistant has seen him?" His gaze flicked to Marco, who was standing slightly behind me with his face turned away from the stranger. "I'm sorry," Marco said, his voice slightly rougher than usual, accent carefully suppressed. "Haven't seen him either. You want coffee or not?" The stranger's smile sharpened. "Actually, yes. Espresso. Double shot." I moved to the machine, my hands trembling slightly as I prepared the drink. Behind me, I could feel the tension radiating from Marco like heat from a furnace. In my peripheral vision, I noticed that the man at the corner table had put down his newspaper and was watching our interaction with sharp focus. "Beautiful place you have here," the stranger said conversationally as I worked. "Very cozy, the kind of place where a man could feel safe, comfortable. Maybe let his guard down." "Thank you," I replied, not trusting myself to say more. "I imagine you get all kinds of customers. Business people, tourists, locals." His eyes flicked around the bakery, cataloging exits, noting the positions of other customers. "Maybe even people who are running late for important meetings." I handed him the espresso, our fingers brushing briefly as he took the cup. His skin was cold, and something about his touch made my skin crawl. "That'll be $3.50, I said. He placed a 20 on the counter. "Keep the change. For your discretion." Then he was gone, leaving the 20 and his untouched espresso behind. The silence that followed his departure was deafening. I could hear my own heartbeat, the hum of the refrigeration units, the distant sound of traffic outside. Finally, Marco spoke. "Elena, I need you to close the bakery, right now." "What? Why?" "Because that was Carlo Torino's lieutenant," Marco said grimly. "And if he's here, it means they know exactly where I am." I looked around my bakery at the half-dozen customers still seated at tables, at the display cases full of pastries I'd made that morning, at the warm, comfortable space that represented everything I'd worked for. "How long until they come back?" I asked. "Could be hours, could be minutes," Marco said. "Elena, please. I know this is your life, but it's okay," I said quietly, surprising myself with the decision. "You're right. We need to clear everyone out." Relief flooded Marco's features. "Thank you." I moved quickly, apologizing to customers, offering to-go boxes for unfinished meals, making excuses about a gas leak that required immediate evacuation. Most people grumbled but complied, and within 10 minutes my bakery was empty except for Marco, myself, and the man at the corner table who I now realized was definitely one of Vincent's people. What happens now? I asked as I locked the front door and flipped the sign to closed. "Now we wait," Marco said, "and hope that Anthony and Vincent have everything in place." As if summoned by his words, both men appeared from the back room, moving with the kind of purposeful efficiency that suggested they'd been preparing for this moment. "Building secure," Anthony reported. "We've got eyes on all approaches and backup is standing by." "How many?" Marco asked. "Torino brought 6 cars," Vincent said grimly. "Professional crew." They're not planning to leave witnesses. The casual way he said it, like discussing the weather, made my blood run cold. Witnesses to what? To whatever they're planning to do to me, Marco said. Elena, I need you to go upstairs and... No, I interrupted. I'm not hiding while you fight a war in my bakery. This isn't your fight, Marco said urgently. You made it my fight the moment you brought it to my door, I shot back. If they're coming here, if they're threatening my business, then it absolutely is my fight. She has a point, Anthony said. Besides, we might need someone who knows the building layout, alternate exits, that sort of thing. Marco looked like he wanted to argue, but Vincent was nodding in agreement. The lady stays, he decided. But she stays back, and she does exactly what we tell her to do. Before I could respond to that patronizing directive, the sound of car doors slamming echoed from outside. Multiple car doors. Showtime, Anthony murmured, checking the weapon that had appeared in his hand like magic. Through the front windows, I could see them. Men in dark coats, moving with military precision, surrounding my bakery like they were preparing to storm a fortress. Elena, Marco said, his voice gentle despite the chaos about to erupt around us. Whatever happens in the next few minutes, I want you to know last night meant something to me. More than you know. I looked at him, really looked at him, taking in the sharp beauty of his features, the careful control he maintained even in the face of mortal danger, the way he was looking at me like he was trying to memorize my face. It meant something to me too, I said softly. Then all hell broke loose. The front windows exploded inward in a shower of glass and gunfire. Vincent and Anthony moved like dancers, taking positions behind overturned tables, returning fire with the kind of precision that spoke of extensive training. Marco pushed me toward the back of the bakery, his body shielding mine as bullets chewed through the air where we'd been standing. Kishin! He shouted over the chaos. There's a back door. We scrambled toward the rear of the building, but before we could reach the exit, more gunfire erupted from that direction. They'd covered the back exit, too. Basement, I gasped, pointing toward a door I usually used for storage. There's a tunnel that leads to the building next door. Part of the old subway system. Marco stared at me. You have a tunnel? Mrs. Chun showed it to me when I first moved in. Apparently half the buildings on this block are connected. I was already moving toward the basement door, keys jingling in my shaking hands. Bootleggers used them during Prohibition. The sound of splintering wood from the front of the bakery told us that Torino's men had broken through the barricade Anthony and Vincent had hastily constructed. Go, Marco shouted, pushing me toward the basement stairs. I'll cover you. I'm not leaving without you. Elena, we go together or we don't go at all, I said firmly, even as my heart hammered against my ribs. For a split second, Marco looked like he was going to argue. Then he nodded grimly and followed me down the narrow wooden stairs into my basement. The tunnel was exactly where I remembered it, behind a false wall that looked like part of the building's foundation. It was narrow, barely wide enough for one person, and disappeared into darkness that our phone flashlights could only partially penetrate. Where does it come out? Marco asked as we heard heavy footsteps on the floor above us. Mrs. Chun's flower shop, I said. But Marco, if we go through there, we'll be putting her in danger too. The flower shop has a back alley exit, Marco said. We can get out without involving her. More footsteps above. And voices angry? Frustrated voices that suggested Vincent and Anthony were doing a good job of making Torino's men work for every inch of my bakery they claimed. They'll follow us, I said as we started into the tunnel, won't they? Probably, Marco admitted. But by then, reinforcements will be here. The tunnel was cramped and musty, filled with the smell of old earth and damp stone. We moved as quickly as we could in the darkness, our phones providing just enough light to avoid the worst of the debris that had accumulated over the decades since the passage was last regularly used. Behind us, the sounds of fighting continued, sporadic gunfire, shouting, the crash of furniture being overturned. I tried not to think about Vincent and Anthony, tried not to imagine what was happening to my beautiful bakery. Here, Marco said as our lights revealed a set of stone steps leading upward. This should be the flower shop. The steps ended at another false wall, this one equipped with a simple latch mechanism that looked like it hadn't been used in years. Marco worked it carefully, and after a moment, the wall swung inward to reveal the storage room of Mrs. Chun's shop. We climbed out into the familiar space, surrounded by buckets of flowers and the sweet, earthy smell of blooms and growing things. Everything was quiet here, peaceful in a way that felt surreal after the violence we'd just escaped. Mrs. Chun? I called softly. No answer. Given the gunfire next door, she probably locked herself in our back office and called the police. Marco was already moving toward the rear of the shop, checking the back exit that led to the alley behind the building. Clear, he reported. But Elena ... What? He turned back to me, his expression grim. When we go out there, when we leave this building, everything changes. You understand that? I nodded, though I wasn't sure I understood anything anymore. What do you mean? I mean that after today, the Torinos will know you helped me. They'll know you're important to me. There won't be any going back to your normal life. The weight of that statement settled over me like a lead blanket. My normal life. My quiet existence, my simple routine. My small world where the biggest drama was usually whether Mr. Rodriguez's ancient beagle would try to steal pastries from the display case again. So, what are you saying? I asked. That I should have let you die in this storm last night? I'm saying that I'm sorry, Marco said quietly, for all of this. For bringing danger to your door, for destroying your peace, for... I stepped closer to him, close enough that I could see the flecks of gold in his dark eyes, could feel the warmth radiating from his body. Marco, yes? Shut up and kiss me. For a moment, he just stared at me like I'd spoken in a foreign language. Then his hands were at my hair and his mouth was on mine. And nothing else mattered, not the danger, not the uncertainty, not the sound of sirens finally approaching from the distance. He tasted like coffee and danger and something uniquely him that made my head spin. His kiss was gentle at first, almost hesitant, as if he couldn't quite believe this was happening. But when I pressed closer, when I wound my arms around his neck and kissed him back with all the fear and adrenaline and inexplicable attraction I'd been fighting, since the moment he'd walked into my life, he responded with a passion that took my breath away. When we finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Marco rested his forehead against mine. Elena, he whispered, my name sounding like a prayer in his deep voice. I know, I said softly. I know this is crazy, I know it's dangerous, I know we barely know each other, but Marco ... I've been playing it safe my whole life. I've been small and careful and afraid to take risks, and where has it gotten me? Alone in a failing bakery, working 14-hour days just to barely break even. Your bakery isn't failing, Marco said fiercely. It's beautiful, it's successful, it's not enough, I interrupted. Not anymore, maybe it never was. Maybe I've just been too afraid to admit that I wanted more. More what? I looked at him, really looked at him, taking in the sharp intelligence in his dark eyes, the careful strength in the way he held me, the vulnerability he'd let me see despite all the reasons he had to keep his walls up. More everything, I said honestly. More passion, more purpose, more ... life. Marco cupped my face in his hands, his thumb tracing the line of my cheekbone with infinite gentleness. Elena, you have no idea what you're saying, what being with me would mean. Then tell me, I said. Show me, but don't ask me to go back to pretending that last night didn't change everything, because it did. The moment I opened that door, the moment I let you in, everything changed. Outside, the sirens were getting closer, and I could hear the distant sound of what might have been more gunfire. Our borrowed moment of peace was about to end, and we both knew it. We need to go, Marco said reluctantly. I know, but I didn't move away from him, didn't break the circle of his arms. Marco? Whatever happens next, whatever this thing is between us ... I don't regret it, any of it, even if it destroys your life. Even if it saves it, I countered. Something shifted in his expression, surprise, hope, something that looked almost like wonder. You really mean that? I really mean that. Marco studied my face for another long moment as if trying to read my soul. Then he nodded once, a decision made. All right, he said. Then we do this together. Together, I agreed. He took my hand and we walked out the back door of Mrs. Chun's flower shop and into whatever came next. The alley behind the building was narrow and shadowed, filled with dumpsters and the kind of urban detritus that accumulated in spaces where nobody looked too closely. Marco moved with the fluid caution of someone accustomed to dangerous situations, checking corners and listening for sounds that might indicate trouble. This way, he said quietly, leading me toward the far end of the alley where it opened onto a side street. We'd almost reached the street when a black sedan pulled up, blocking our exit. For a heart-stopping moment, I thought it was Torino's people. Then the passenger door opened and Anthony climbed out, his shirt torn and a cut on his forehead, but otherwise intact. "About time," he said with a grin that didn't quite hide the relief in his voice. We were starting to worry. "Vincent?" Marco asked as we approached the car. "Alive and annoying as ever," Anthony replied. "Though he's probably going to need stitches. The Torinos brought more firepower than we expected." "Casualties?" "2 of theirs, none of ours. They retreated when the sirens got too close." Anthony's expression grew serious. "But Marco, they made their point. This was a message, not a serious attempt to take you out." If it had been ... double quotes, he didn't finish the sentence, but he didn't need to. If the Torinos had really wanted Marco dead, they would have brought more men, better weapons, a more coordinated assault. "So what was the message?" I asked. "That nowhere is safe," Marco replied grimly. "That they can reach me anywhere, anytime. That anyone who helps me becomes a target." I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cool air in the alley. "Including me. Especially you," Anthony confirmed. "Sorry, Elena, but after today, you're officially on their radar." "Big time." Marco's hand tightened on mine. "Which is why we're not taking any chances." "Elena, I know you want to maintain your independence, but where are we going?" I interrupted. Marco blinked. "What? You said we're not taking any chances. Where are we going? What's the plan?" Marco and Anthony exchanged glances. "Elena," Marco said carefully, "when I said we, I meant, you meant both of us," I said firmly. "Because we established that we're doing this together, remember? Or was that just something you said to get me to cooperate?" "That's not." Marco ran his free hand through his hair in frustration. "Elena, this isn't a game. These people will kill you without hesitation if they think it will hurt me or help them. So teach me how to stay alive," I said. "Protect me, train me, whatever. But don't try to ship me off somewhere safe while you handle the dangerous stuff alone." I meant what I said about being partners in this. She's got a point. Vincent's voice came from inside the car. "Safer to keep her close where we can watch her than to stash her somewhere and hope nobody finds her." "Vincent?" Marco's voice carried a warning. "What?" "I'm just saying, the lady's already proven she's got good instincts and better nerves than half our crew. Besides, trying to keep her locked up somewhere against her will is just asking for trouble." I couldn't help but smile at that assessment. "I like him." "Don't encourage him," Marco said, but there was exasperation rather than real anger in his voice. Anthony checked his watch. "We need to move. The cops will be all over this area in about 10 minutes. And we want to be long gone before they start asking questions." Marco looked at me one more time, his dark eyes searching my face for ... "What? Second thoughts?" "Fear? Signs that I was about to change my mind and demand to be taken to the nearest police station." Instead, he must have seen determination because, after a moment, his expression softened. "All right," he said quietly. Together, I confirmed. We climbed into the back seat of the sedan, Vincent sliding over to make room. As Anthony pulled away from the alley and into traffic, I caught a glimpse of my street in the rearview mirror. Police cars were arriving, their red and blue lights painting the morning in urgent colors. I could see the shattered windows of my bakery, could imagine the damage that had been done to the space I'd worked so hard to create. A wave of loss hit me so suddenly that I had to bite my lip to keep from crying out. That bakery represented everything I'd built with my mother, everything I'd worked toward for 3 years. And now it was gone, not destroyed maybe, but changed forever, tainted by violence and danger. Marco must have sensed my distress because his arm came around my shoulders, pulling me against his side with gentle strength. "We'll rebuild it," he said quietly, his words meant only for me. "Whatever was damaged, we'll make it better than it was before." "You can't," I whispered. "You can't rebuild the piece of it, the safety. People won't feel the same way about it anymore. Then we'll build you a new one," Marco said fiercely. "Somewhere better, somewhere beautiful. Somewhere that's yours and no one can take it away from you." I looked up at him, seeing the sincerity in his dark eyes, the genuine desire to fix what his presence in my life had broken. "You don't understand. It's not about the money or the location. It's about ... "What?" "It was the last thing connecting me to my old life," I said. "To who I was before ... this, before you." Marco was quiet for a moment, his arm tightening around me. "And you're grieving that loss, aren't you?" I countered. "Don't you miss the person you were before you had to become?" this, I gestured vaguely at the bulletproof sedan, at Vincent cleaning a gun with casual efficiency, at the whole surreal reality of our situation. Every day, Marco admitted. But Elena, sometimes the person you become is better than the person you were. Sometimes you don't realize how small your world was until someone forces you to expand it. Is that what you're doing? Forcing me to expand my world? I'm hoping you'll choose to, he said. But the choice has to be yours. Anthony caught my eye in the rearview mirror. For what it's worth, Elena, the family takes care of its own. If you're with Marco, you're family. That means protection, resources, support, ... But it also means obligations, loyalty, secrecy. What kind of obligations? I asked. The kind that mean you can never go back to your old life, Vincent said bluntly. Ever, the kind that mean you become part of something bigger than yourself, but you also give up the right to make purely selfish decisions. I thought about that as we drove through the city streets, heading toward a destination that no one had bothered to share with me. A life where I would never again have the simple freedom to make choices based only on my own wants and needs. A life where every decision will be filtered through considerations of family loyalty, organizational security, personal safety. It should have terrified me. Instead, I found myself thinking about the way Marco had looked at my bakery the night before like it was something precious and beautiful. About the way he'd insisted on paying me far more than my simple hospitality had been worth. About the careful gentleness with which he'd accepted my help, never taking more than was offered, never pushing for more than I was willing to give. This was a man who understood responsibility, who carried the weight of other people's lives and safety without complaint, who had probably never made a purely selfish decision in his adult life. Maybe that wasn't the prison I'd initially thought it was. Maybe it was just a different kind of freedom, the freedom that came from being part of something larger than yourself. From knowing that your choices mattered not just to you, but to people who counted on you. Where are we going? I asked. Safe house, Marco replied. At least for tonight while we figure out our next move. And then? Marco and Anthony exchanged another one of those wordless communications that seemed to be second nature to them. And then we end this, Marco said grimly. One way or another, we end this. The safe house turned out to be a brownstone in a quiet residential neighborhood that looked like it had been designed to be completely unremarkable. The kind of place where no one looked twice at visitors coming and going, where neighbors minded their own business and kept their curtains closed. Inside, it was comfortably furnished but impersonal, the kind of space that had been set up to house people temporarily, without any of the personal touches that would make it feel like home. Generic artwork on the walls, neutral colors, furniture that was functional rather than beautiful. There are bedrooms upstairs, Anthony said as he locked the front door behind us and engaged what looked like a very sophisticated security system. Kitchen's stocked, and there's a full communication setup in the office if we need to coordinate with the others. Others? I asked. Extended family, Vincent explained. Associates. People who have a vested interest in making sure Marco stays alive and in charge. I was about to ask more questions when Marco's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen and his expression darkened. What is it? Anthony asked immediately. Text message, Marco said grimly. From a number I don't recognize. He showed us the screen. The message was simple and direct. Tell your baker we enjoyed visiting her little shop. Next time we'll stay for dessert. A chill ran down my spine. They're threatening me. They're trying to get to me through you, Marco corrected, but his voice was tight with barely controlled rage. It's a standard intimidation tactic. Make it personal, make it about someone the target cares about. Someone you care about, I repeated, testing the words. Is that what I am? Marco looked at me for a long moment, his dark eyes intense. Yes, he said simply. You are. The words should have felt premature. We'd known each other for less than 24 hours, and most of that time had been spent in crisis mode. But somehow they felt right, natural, like an acknowledgement of something that had been building between us since the moment our eyes had met through the rain-streaked window of my bakery. Good, I said, surprising myself with the certainty in my voice. Because you've become someone I care about too. Vincent cleared his throat. As touching as this is, we need to talk strategy. The Torinos have made their move, and they're not going to stop here. What are our options? Marco asked, but his eyes remained on my face. Limited, Anthony replied. We can go to ground, wait them out, hope they lose interest or get distracted by other opportunities. How long would that take? Months, maybe years. And there's no guarantee they'd ever completely back off. What's the other option? I asked, though I suspected I already knew. We take the fight to them, Vincent said bluntly. And this permanently. Meaning? Meaning we make it clear that messing with our family comes with consequences too severe to justify whatever they think they'll gain. I looked between the three men, seeing the grim determination in their faces. The way they spoke about violence like it was just another business tool to be deployed when necessary. And if I asked you not to? I said quietly. If I asked you to find a peaceful solution? Marco's expression softened. Elena, I'm not naive, I continued. I understand that you live in a world where violence is sometimes necessary. But these people came after me because of you. If there's a way to resolve this without anyone else getting hurt, there isn't, Vincent said, not unkindly but with absolute certainty. Elena, I respect that you want to find a peaceful solution, but you have to understand the Torinos don't negotiate. They don't compromise. They see weakness, they exploit it. They see strength, they test it. The only language they understand is force. He's right, Anthony added. This conflict was always going to end in violence. The only question was when and on whose terms. I looked at Marco, searching his face for some sign that he disagreed, that there might be another way. Instead, I saw resignation and a deep sadness that spoke of too many decisions just like this one. I'm sorry, he said quietly. I wish there was another option. But Vincent and Anthony are right, the Torinos won't stop until they're made to stop. I sank down onto the generic beige couch, suddenly feeling the full weight of what I'd gotten myself into. This wasn't just about protection anymore, wasn't just about keeping me safe until some nebulous threat passed. This was about war. What happens to me while you're handling this? I asked. You stay here, Marco said immediately. Safe, protected, until it's over. For how long? However long it takes, I thought about that. Days, maybe weeks. Locked away in this impersonal safe house while Marco and his family waged war against the Torinos. Waiting for news, not knowing if he was safe, if he was alive, if the man I'd somehow fallen for in the space of a single night would survive the conflict I'd inadvertently helped escalate. No, I said quietly. Marco blinked. What? I said no. I stood up, facing all three of them with as much dignity as I could muster. I'm not sitting in a safe house for weeks or months while you fight my battles for me. If this is happening because of me, then I'm going to be part of the solution. Elena, Marco's voice was gentle but firm. You can't be involved in this kind of operation. It's too dangerous, and you don't have the training. Then train me, I interrupted. Or find another way for me to help. But don't ask me to hide while you risk your life for mine. That's not what this is, Anthony said. This is about protecting our territory, our business interests. You're important, Elena, but this conflict is bigger than just keeping you safe. Then let me help, I insisted. I'm not helpless. I ran my own business. I survived in a tough neighborhood. I made smart decisions in a crisis situation. I have skills, even if they're not the same skills you have. Vincent was studying me with renewed interest. What kind of skills? I know this city, I said. I know the neighborhoods, the people, the rhythms of daily life. I know how to talk to civilians, how to blend in, how to notice things that seem out of place. I paused, then continued more quietly. And I know how it feels to lose everything you've worked for. If there are other innocent people who might get caught in this crossfire, double quotes, you want to help protect them, Marco said, understanding dawning in his expression. I want to help end this, I corrected. Whatever it takes, however, I can contribute. But I'm not going to sit on the sidelines and wait for other people to decide my fate. The three men exchanged glances. That wordless communication happening again. Finally, Marco spoke. It would be dangerous, he said. More dangerous than anything you've ever experienced. More dangerous than having my bakery shot up by professional killers? Yes. I considered that, weighing the fear against the alternative weeks or months of helpless waiting, of not knowing, of letting other people fight battles that had become mine whether I'd wanted them or not. I accept the risk, I said. Marco closed his eyes briefly, as if in pain. When he opened them again, there was something different in his expression, not resignation, but a kind of fierce pride. All right, he said quietly. But we do this my way. You follow orders, you don't take unnecessary risks, and if I tell you to get out, you get out. No arguments, no heroics. Agreed. And Elena? Marco's voice was softer now, almost vulnerable. If something happens to you because I let you do this, ... I crossed to him, reaching up to frame his face with my hands. Hey, I said gently, nothing's going to happen to me. We're going to end this, and then we're going to figure out what comes next, together. Marco leaned into my touch, his eyes closing as if he was drawing strength from the contact. You're sure about this? Because once we start down this path ... I'm sure, I said, and realized that I was. For the first time in longer than I could remember, I was absolutely certain about something. Marco, last night when you walked into my bakery, you weren't just seeking shelter from the storm. You were seeking shelter from a life that had become too big, too dangerous, too lonely to handle alone. And when I opened that door, I wasn't just offering you coffee and a dry place to sit. I was offering you partnership. Someone to share the burden with. Elena, I know it's crazy, I continued. I know we barely know each other. I know the timing is terrible and the circumstances are insane. But some things don't follow logical timelines. Some things just are. Marco opened his eyes, studying my face with that intense focus I was beginning to recognize. And this is one of those things? This is one of those things, I confirmed. He kissed me then, soft and sweet and full of promise. When we broke apart, Vincent was grinning and Anthony was shaking his head with fond exasperation. All right, Anthony said. If we're going to do this thing, we need to start planning. Vincent, what's our current intelligence on Torino operations? Limited but useful, Vincent replied, pulling out his phone. We know they've been working out of a warehouse complex in Southie, and we have contacts who can get us building layouts, security protocols, that kind of thing. And their numbers? 15 to 20 active members, but not all of them are soldiers. Some are just business associates, money guys, people who wouldn't be involved in direct action. Marco nodded, his arm still around my waist as he shifted into what was clearly a familiar mode of strategic thinking. So we're looking at maybe 8 to 10 people who would actually be involved in an assault operation. Against our 12, Anthony added, plus associated resources. What kind of resources? I asked. Weapons, vehicles, safe houses, contacts, and law enforcement, Vincent explained. The infrastructure that lets us operate without constant interference. I was quiet for a moment, processing the reality of what they were discussing so casually. This wasn't just about ending a conflict, it was about maintaining an entire shadow organization that existed parallel to legitimate society. Elena? Marco's voice was gentle. Having second thoughts? No, I said honestly. Just adjusting my worldview. That earned me a smile from Anthony. It takes some getting used to. But Elena, you should know what we do. It's not just about crime or profit or territory. We provide services that people need, protection that the legitimate system can't or won't offer. We take care of our communities in ways that matter. Like what? Like making sure that elderly people in our neighborhoods don't get mugged or scammed, Vincent said. Like ensuring that small businesses get the loans they need when banks won't even look at them. Like mediating disputes before they turn violent. You're vigilantes, I said, not sure if I was asking or stating. We're family, Marco corrected, in every sense of the word. And family takes care of family. I thought about that as the three men continued planning their assault on the Torino operation. Family, not just blood relations, but chosen bonds, chosen obligations, chosen loyalties. My mother had been my family for most of my life, and when she died, I'd been alone in a way that went deeper than simple loneliness. But looking at Marco, at the easy communication between him and his cousins, at the way they balanced individual strengths to create something stronger than any of them could be alone, maybe family wasn't just about who you were born to. Maybe it was about who you chose to stand with when everything else fell apart. What do you need me to do? I asked. The planning session continued for another 2 hours, and by the end of it, I had a much clearer picture of what we were up against and what we were going to do about it. The Torino operation was based out of a warehouse complex that had been legitimately purchased, but was being used for decidedly illegitimate purposes. Drug storage and distribution, mostly, but also money laundering and what Vincent diplomatically referred to as dispute resolution services. It's a fortress, Anthony explained, showing me building schematics on his laptop. Single access road, clear sight lines in every direction, multiple exit strategies. Whoever designed their security knew what they were doing. But it has weaknesses, Marco added. Every fortress does. The question is whether we can exploit them before they realize what's happening. My role, as it turned out, would be intelligence gathering. While Marco and his team prepared for the actual assault, I would be making contact with people who lived and worked near the warehouse complex, gathering information about routines, schedules, anything that might give us an advantage. I don't like it, Marco said for the third time as we went over the details. Too many variables, too many ways for something to go wrong. Which is why it's perfect, Vincent countered. Elena can go places we can't, ask questions that wouldn't seem suspicious coming from her. A woman asking about neighborhood safety may be looking for a new apartment or a place to relocate her business. Nobody's going to see that as a threat, unless they recognize her from yesterday, Anthony pointed out. They won't, I said with more confidence than I felt. I'll change my appearance, my clothes, my whole presentation. I used to do theater in college. I know how to become someone else when I need to. Marco looked skeptical, but Vincent was nodding approvingly. What kind of someone else? Young professional, maybe a photographer or graphic designer, scouting locations for a project. Someone artsy enough to be interested in industrial architecture, but harmless enough not to trigger anyone's suspicions. That could work, Anthony said slowly. Especially if we give you legitimate-looking credentials, business cards, that sort of thing. How long would we have? Marco asked. 48 hours, maybe 72 if we're lucky, Vincent replied. After that, they'll start getting nervous about the fact that we haven't retaliated yet. They'll either escalate or relocate, and either option makes our job harder. I felt a flutter of nervousness in my stomach. 2 days to gather intelligence for an operation that would determine whether the man I was falling for lived or died. 2 days to prove that I could be more than just someone who needed protecting. I can do this, I said, as much to convince myself as the others. Marco studied my face for a long moment. I know you can, he said finally. That's not what worries me. Then what does? Everything else, he replied honestly. Elena, if something goes wrong, if your cover gets blown or if Torino's people figure out who you are ... then you'll come get me, I said simply. That's what partners do, right? Something shifted in Marco's expression, surprise, maybe, or recognition. Partners, he repeated. Partners, I confirmed. He kissed me again, soft and lingering, and when we broke apart, there was something different in his eyes. Not just attraction or protection or even affection, but something deeper. Something that looked like the beginning of love. All right, he said quietly. Let's do this. The next morning, I stood in front of the mirror in the safe house bathroom, barely recognizing myself. My dark hair was pulled back in a sleek ponytail instead of my usual loose waves. I wore designer jeans and a fitted blazer that Vincent had somehow procured overnight, along with expensive-looking boots and subtle makeup that made my features sharper and more sophisticated. The business cards in my wallet identified me as Isabella Romano, freelance photographer specializing in urban architecture. My fake portfolio, loaded onto a tablet that looked like it had cost more than my monthly rent, contained legitimate-looking samples of industrial photography. You look good, Marco said from the doorway, but his voice was tight with worry. I look different, I corrected. Which is the point, Elena? He stepped closer, his hands settling on my shoulders. You don't have to do this. We can find another way. In 48 hours? He was quiet for a moment. No, he admitted. Probably not. Then this is our best option. I reached up to touch his face, noting the tension around his eyes, the careful control he was maintaining over his obvious anxiety. Marco, I know you're worried. I'm worried too. But this is important not just for ending the conflict, but for proving that I can be more than just someone who needs protecting. You don't have anything to prove to me. I have something to prove to myself, I said softly. My whole life, I've played it safe. I've chosen the secure option, the predictable path, the decisions that minimized risk, even if they also minimized potential. When my mother got sick, when she died, when I inherited the bakery, every choice I made was about preservation, not growth. And now? Now I want to choose growth, I said. Even if it's scary. Especially if it's scary. Marco was quiet for a long moment, his dark eyes searching mine. You're sure about this? I'm sure about this, I confirmed. And Marco? I'm sure about us. He kissed me then, deep and desperate and full of all the things we couldn't say out loud. When we broke apart, both breathing hard, there was determination in his expression alongside the worry. 48 hours, he said. 48 hours, I agreed. Anthony peered in the doorway, checking his watch. Time to go, Elena. Vincent's got the car ready. I took one last look at myself in the mirror. Isabella Romano. Photographer, confident and professional and completely fictional. Then I followed Anthony downstairs to where Vincent was waiting with another unmarked sedan. Remember, Vincent said as I climbed into the passenger seat, you're looking for a location for a photography series on post-industrial architecture. You're particularly interested in warehouses and manufacturing, facilities that have interesting lighting or structural details. Got it. You're new to the city, so you don't know which neighborhoods are safe and which ones to avoid. You're looking for local insight, recommendations, warnings about areas to stay away from. Understood. And Elena? Vincent's voice was serious. If anything feels wrong, if anyone seems too interested in your questions or starts asking questions of their own, you get out immediately. Don't try to gather more information. Don't push for details. Just leave. I will. Vincent studied my face for a moment, then nodded. You'll do fine. The drive to the target neighborhood took about 20 minutes, through a part of the city I'd never had reason to visit before. It was industrial, mostly warehouses and manufacturing facilities interspersed with the kind of small businesses that served blue-collar workers. Auto repair shops, convenience stores, places that cashed checks and sold lottery tickets. Vincent dropped me off at a coffee shop 3 blocks from the Torino warehouse complex. 2 hours, he said. If you're not back here by then, we come looking. 2 hours, I agreed. Then I was on my own, walking through a neighborhood that felt completely foreign, trying to embody a confidence I didn't entirely feel. The coffee shop was exactly what I'd expected: working-class clientele, strong coffee, a bulletin board covered with job postings and apartment listings. I ordered a large cappuccino and struck up a conversation with the barista, a woman about my age with tired eyes and paint-stained fingers. I'm looking for interesting buildings to photograph, I explained, showing her my tablet portfolio. Industrial stuff, warehouses, anything with good bones and character. Oh, you'll find plenty of that around here, she said with a slight laugh. Half these buildings are older than my grandmother. Some of them are pretty cool, actually. Any particular areas I should check out? There's a whole complex about 6 blocks south of here, she said, pointing in the direction of the Torino operation. Used to be a textile factory back in the day, now it's split up into different businesses. Some of the brickwork is really beautiful, especially the way the afternoon light hits it. Sounds perfect. Is it safe to walk around there? I'm new to the city, so I don't really know which areas to avoid. The barista's expression grew more serious. During the day, sure, but I wouldn't hang around there after dark. There's been some weird activity lately. Lots of people coming and going at strange hours, cars with tinted windows, that kind of thing. Weird how? Just not normal for the neighborhood, you know? Used to be quiet around here, mostly small businesses and storage facilities, but lately ... she shrugged. Maybe it's nothing, but my instincts tell me to steer clear. I thanked her for the information and spent another few minutes asking about other potential locations, building my cover as a photographer genuinely interested in the area. Then I headed south toward the warehouse complex, my heart beating faster with each step. The area matched the barista's description perfectly. Old brick buildings with the kind of industrial architecture that had been built to last, now repurposed for modern uses. Most of them looked legitimate: a furniture repair shop, a catering company, a business that seemed to specialize in restaurant equipment, and then I saw it. The building matched the schematics Vincent had shown me, but seeing it in person gave me a much better sense of what we were dealing with. It was larger than I'd expected, and the security was subtle but comprehensive. Cameras at every corner, reinforced doors, windows that had been bricked over on the ground floor. But it was the people that really caught my attention. Men in expensive suits who didn't belong in this blue-collar neighborhood. Cars that were too new, too clean, too obviously armor-plated. The kind of casual arrogance that came from knowing you were untouchable. I spent an hour walking around the perimeter, taking pictures of other buildings while keeping one eye on the Torino operation. I noted delivery schedules, shift changes, the rhythm of activity that would help Marco and his team plan their approach. It was when I was photographing a particularly interesting fire escape on a building across the street that I noticed him. A man in a dark coat standing in the doorway of the catering company, watching me with obvious interest. Not the casual curiosity of someone wondering what I was photographing, but the focused attention of someone who found my presence concerning. My pulse quickened, but I forced myself to continue with the photo shoot, moving naturally from building to building as if I hadn't noticed his scrutiny. But when I glanced back a few minutes later, he was gone. And when I turned to photograph another building, there he was again. Closer this time, pretending to look at his phone, but clearly tracking my movements. Vincent's words echoed in my mind. If anything feels wrong, if anyone seems too interested in your questions or starts asking questions of their own, you get out immediately. I had enough information for now. Time to leave. I packed up my camera equipment with deliberate casualness, then started walking back toward the coffee shop where Vincent would pick me up. But when I risked a glance over my shoulder, the man in the dark coat was following me. My mouth went dry. This was bad. This was very, very bad. I forced myself to maintain a steady pace, not too fast, not obviously fleeing. Just a photographer finished with her work for the day, heading back to wherever photographers go when they're done taking pictures. But the footsteps behind me were getting closer. 2 blocks from the coffee shop, I ducked into a small grocery store and pretended to browse the produce section while keeping an eye on the front windows. The man in the dark coat walked past, but slowly, clearly looking for me. I pulled out my phone and sent Vincent a text. Compromised. Need pickup at grocery store corner of Maple and 3rd. His response was immediate. On my way. Stay inside. I bought an apple I didn't want and lingered near the checkout counter, making small talk with the elderly cashier while monitoring the street outside. The man in the dark coat had disappeared, but that didn't make me feel safer. If anything, it made me more nervous. Where had he gone? 5 minutes felt like an hour before I saw Vincent's sedan pull up outside. I paid for my apple and walked quickly to the car, resisting the urge to run. Drive, I said as soon as I got in. Vincent didn't ask questions, just pulled smoothly into traffic and headed back toward the safe house. It wasn't until we'd gone several blocks that I felt safe enough to breathe normally. What happened? Vincent asked. I told him about the man in the dark coat, about the feeling of being watched and followed. Vincent's expression grew more serious with each detail. Did he approach you directly? Ask any questions? No, but he was definitely tracking me. And Vincent ... he knew I didn't belong there. I don't know how, but he knew. Vincent was quiet for a moment. Could be you were just unlucky, caught someone's attention at the wrong moment, or ... Or they've been expecting something like this. Maybe they've got people watching for exactly the kind of reconnaissance you were doing. The implications of that hit me like a cold wave. You think they're expecting an attack? I think they're not as confident about their position as they want us to believe, Vincent replied. Which is either very good news or very bad news, depending on how they decide to respond. We were almost back to the safe house when Vincent's phone rang. He answered with one hand, keeping his eyes on the road. Yeah? A pause, then his expression darkened. When? Another pause. All right, we'll be there in 5 minutes. He hung up and immediately made a sharp turn, heading away from the safe house. What's wrong? I asked. That was Anthony, Vincent said grimly. Someone just delivered a package to the safe house. A package that wasn't supposed to exist. My blood turned to ice. What kind of package? The kind that means our location has been compromised, Vincent replied. Elena, I need you to listen to me very carefully. We're not going back to the safe house. We're meeting Marco and Anthony at a secondary location, and then we're going underground until we can figure out what went wrong. What kind of package? I repeated. Vincent glanced at me, and the look in his eyes made my stomach drop. Photos, he said quietly. Of you at the bakery, at the safe house, getting into our car this morning. With a note that said, tell Isabella Romano we enjoyed her photography tour. The world seemed to tilt sideways. They knew, somehow, despite all our precautions, despite my careful cover identity, they knew exactly who I was and what I'd been doing. How is that possible? I whispered. I don't know, Vincent admitted. But Elena, this changes everything. They're not just watching us, they're playing with us. And that means Marco is walking into a trap. We drove in tense silence through the city. Vincent's hands white-knuckled on the steering wheel as he navigated through traffic with the kind of control urgency that spoke of years of experience with dangerous situations. Where are we meeting them? I asked. Backup location, Vincent replied tersely. Warehouse in Charlestown that we use for emergency situations. How do we know that location isn't compromised too? We don't, Vincent admitted. But it's our best option right now. I stared out the window at the city passing by, trying to process what had happened. Somehow, in the space of a few hours, I'd gone from gathering intelligence to being a liability. The careful plan we'd spent so much time developing had fallen apart, and now we were improvising with incomplete information and too many variables. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. My heart sank as I read it. Isabella, your photography skills are impressive, but your acting needs work. We'll be in touch soon. See, Vincent, I said quietly, showing him the phone. He glanced at the screen and swore under his breath. They've got your number. How? Could be they hacked the phone. Could be they've got contacts in the phone company. Could be any number of things. Vincent made another sharp turn, his eyes constantly checking mirrors. What matters is that they're escalating. What does C mean? Carlo Torino, Vincent said grimly. The head of their family. A chill ran down my spine. The man we'd been planning to move against was now making direct contact with me using information he shouldn't have had access to. Either our security was much worse than we thought, or ... Vincent, I said slowly, what if this isn't about compromised security? What if they wanted me to gather that intelligence? Vincent's hands tightened on the steering wheel. What do you mean? I mean, what if they let me see what I saw? What if they wanted us to think we had good intelligence when we actually have exactly what they want us to have? Vincent was quiet for a long moment, processing the implications. You think the whole reconnaissance mission was a setup? I think it's possible, I said. The barista at the coffee shop, the way she directed me specifically to their warehouse complex. The man who followed me but didn't actually try to approach or stop me ... The fact that I was able to observe their operation for an hour without being directly confronted ... Son of a bitch, Vincent muttered. Elena, if you're right, if this whole thing has been a setup from the beginning ... then Marco is walking into exactly the kind of trap we thought we were avoiding. I finished. Vincent immediately pulled out his phone and dialed. Anthony, we have a problem. A big problem. He explained my theory quickly and efficiently, then listened for a moment. No, we can't be sure, but we can't risk assuming it's not true either. Another pause. All right, we'll meet you there in 10 minutes. He hung up and looked at me with something that might have been respect. You might have just saved Marco's life. Might have, I repeated. But we won't know for sure until we can warn him. About that, Vincent said, his expression growing more serious. Elena, if this is a setup, if the Torinos have been orchestrating this whole thing from the beginning, then they know about the backup location too. The implications of that statement hit me like a physical blow. Then where are we going? Into a trap, Vincent said simply. But it's a trap we know about, which gives us some advantages. I thought about Marco. Probably already en route to the meeting location, unaware that everything we thought we knew might be wrong. Can you call him? Warn him? Phone communications aren't secure, Vincent replied. If they've got our numbers, they might be monitoring our calls too. So what do we do? Vincent was quiet for a moment, then made another sharp turn that took us away from the direction we'd been heading. We improvise, he said finally. And we hope we're smart enough to stay ahead of whatever game Torino is playing. Where are we going now? To get backup, Vincent said. Real backup, not just Anthony and a handful of associates. If Torino wants to play games, we'll show him what happens when you underestimate the Salvatore family. As we drove through the darkening city, I found myself thinking about the sequence of events that had brought us to this point. Marco showing up at my bakery during the storm, the attack the next morning, the careful intelligence gathering that now seemed like an elaborate charade. Vincent, I said slowly, what if this goes back further than today? What if they'd been planning this since before Marco ever showed up at my bakery? Vincent glanced at me. What do you mean? I mean, what if the storm was just convenient timing? What if they were already planning to use me as leverage against Marco, and the fact that he took shelter at my bakery just gave them the perfect opportunity? You think they've been watching you longer than we realized? I think it's possible, I said. I think maybe we've all been playing a game where we didn't know the rules. Vincent's phone buzzed with a text. He glanced at it and his expression darkened further. What now? I asked. Anthony, Vincent said tersely. The backup location is blown. Someone took out the security team 20 minutes ago. My heart sank. Is Marco ... Unknown, Vincent replied. But Elena, we need to assume the worst and plan accordingly. Which means what? Vincent pulled into the parking lot of what looked like an abandoned auto repair shop and cut the engine. Which means we're officially on our own. He made a phone call speaking in rapid Italian that I couldn't follow. When he hung up, some of the tension had left his shoulders. Good news, he said. Marco never made it to the backup location. He got spooked by something and went to ground at a different safe house. Relief flooded through me. He's okay? He's alive, Vincent corrected. Whether he's okay depends on how quickly we can figure out our next move. What are our options? Vincent was quiet for a moment, staring out at the gathering darkness. Limited, he said finally. Torino has been playing this game longer than we realized, and he's got more pieces on the board than we thought. But he doesn't have Marco, I pointed out. And he doesn't have you or Anthony. No, Vincent agreed. But Elena ... He does have something that might be even more valuable. What? Vincent turned to look at me, his expression serious. He has you convinced that you're just an innocent bystander who got caught up in this by accident. I stared at him. What's that supposed to mean? It means, Vincent said carefully, that we need to consider the possibility that your involvement in this situation isn't as accidental as it appears. A cold chill ran down my spine. Vincent, what are you saying? I'm saying that maybe you should think very carefully about the sequence of events that brought Marco to your door, Vincent said quietly, and about whether any of those events were really as random as they seemed. I thought back to that night, the storm, the way Marco had seemed to appear out of nowhere, the way he'd looked when he'd seen me through the window of my bakery, the way he'd hesitated before knocking like he was making a decision about something. You think Marco was sent to me? I asked. I think, Vincent said carefully, that we need to consider all possibilities, including the possibility that someone wanted you and Marco to meet. That world seemed to shift around me as the implications of what he was suggesting sank in. If my meeting with Marco hadn't been accidental, if someone had orchestrated our introduction? Who? I whispered. That's what we need to figure out, Vincent replied. And we need to figure it out fast because Elena ... If you're not who you think you are, then everything we've planned is based on false assumptions. My phone buzzed again. Another text from the unknown number. Ready to stop playing games, Isabella? Meet me at Pier 47 in 1 hour. Come alone or Marco dies. Vincent read the message over my shoulder and swore creatively in what sounded like at least 3 languages. Well, he said finally, I guess that answers the question about whether they have Marco, but somehow I wasn't convinced. Something about the message felt wrong, felt too convenient. Like everything else that had happened since I'd started gathering intelligence. It seemed designed to push me toward a specific decision. Vincent, I said slowly, I don't think they have Marco. What makes you say that? Because if they had him, they wouldn't need to threaten him to get me to come, I said. They'd just show me proof of life and tell me what they wanted. This feels like they're trying to force a meeting they can't get any other way. Vincent studied my face for a moment. You might be right. But Elena, whether they have Marco or not, meeting them alone would be suicide. Then we don't meet them alone, I said. But we also don't ignore the message. What do you have in mind? I looked out at the darkening city, thinking about everything that had happened, all the careful moves and countermoves that had brought us to this point. I think, I said slowly, that it's time to stop reacting to what they're doing and start making them react to what we're doing. Meaning? Meaning we take control of the game, I said. And we change the rules. Vincent's phone rang before he could respond. He glanced at the screen and his expression lightened slightly. Marco, he said, answering immediately. Where are you? He listened for a moment, then looked at me. He wants to talk to you. I took the phone with trembling hands. Marco? Elena. His voice sounded strained but alert. Are you all right? I'm fine, I said, relief flooding through me at the sound of his voice. Marco, where are you? Vincent said the backup location was compromised. I'm somewhere safe, Marco replied. But, Elena, we have a problem. A bigger problem than we thought. I know. They've been playing us from the beginning. It's worse than that, Marco said grimly. Elena, I've been doing some research on your background, trying to understand how they got so much information about you so quickly. My heart started beating faster. And there are gaps, Marco said quietly. Inconsistencies in your records, discrepancies in your timeline. Elena ... I don't think you are who you think you are. The words hit me like a physical blow. What's that supposed to mean? It means, Marco said gently, that I think you might have been placed in that bakery specifically to be there when I needed help. And I think whoever placed you there has been planning this game a lot longer than any of us realized. I sank back in my seat, my mind reeling. That's impossible. Is it? Marco's voice was sad but certain. Elena, think about it. Your mother's death, the way you inherited the bakery, the timing of everything ... doesn't any of it seem too convenient? Too perfectly designed to put you in the right place at the right time. I wanted to argue, wanted to insist that he was wrong, that my life was real, that my memories were genuine. But as I thought back over the past few years, doubts started creeping in. Little inconsistencies I never paid attention to, gaps in my memory that I'd attributed to grief ... Who am I? I whispered. I don't know, Marco admitted. But Elena, whoever you are, whatever this is about, I want you to know that what I feel for you is real. Whatever brought us together, whatever game we've been caught up in, my feelings for you are genuine. Mine too, I said softly, even as my world crumbled around me. Good, Marco said. Because we're going to need that to get through what comes next. Which is? We're going to find out who's been pulling the strings, Marco said firmly. We're going to end this game once and for all. And then we're going to decide who we want to be going forward. I looked at Vincent, who was watching me with sympathetic eyes. How? Meet me at the old church on Beacon Hill, Marco said. St. Catherine's. I'll explain everything when you get there. Marco, what if this is another trap? Then we spring it together, Marco replied. Partners, remember? Partners, I agreed, even though I wasn't sure what that word meant anymore. After I hung up, Vincent and I sat in silence for a moment, both processing the implications of what Marco had revealed. You okay? Vincent asked finally. I don't know, I said honestly. Vincent, if what Marco is saying is true, if my whole life has been some kind of elaborate setup, then who am I really? You're Elena, Vincent said firmly. You're the woman who opened her door to help a stranger in a storm. You're the woman who faced down armed gunmen rather than abandon the people she cared about. You're the woman who gathered intelligence behind enemy lines and figured out that we were being played before any of the rest of us did. But if my memories aren't real, your actions are real, Vincent interrupted. Your choices are real. Your courage is real. Whatever else might be fabricated, those things are genuine. I nodded, trying to hold on to that thought as Vincent started the car and we headed toward Beacon Hill. Whatever I was about to learn about myself, whatever revelations were waiting at St. Catherine's, I was going to face them with the same determination that had gotten me this far. Because Vincent was right. Whatever else might be in question, my choices were real. And I was choosing to see this through to the end. The Church of St. Catherine sat on a quiet side street in one of Boston's most historic neighborhoods, its Gothic spires reaching toward the darkening sky like stone prayers. Vincent dropped me off at the corner and melted back into the shadows, part of a security perimeter that I hoped was more effective than our previous arrangements had been. Inside, the church was dimly lit by candles and colored light filtering through stained glass windows. Marco was waiting in a pew near the front, and when he looked up at my approach, I saw the same conflicted emotions in his dark eyes that I was feeling. Elena, he said softly, rising to meet me. Is that really my name? I asked. Marco hesitated. I think so, but Elena ... There are things about your past, about your mother's death, about how you came to own the bakery ... Things that don't add up. Tell me. Marco gestured for me to sit beside him in the pew, then pulled out a tablet loaded with what looked like official documents. Your mother, he began carefully. Elena Rodriguez Martinez died of cancer 2 years ago. That part is true. But the bakery... Elena, according to property records, you didn't inherit it, you bought it. 3 days after your mother's funeral, with money that came from an account that had never existed before that week. I stared at the documents, trying to process what I was seeing. That's impossible. I remember inheriting it. I remember Mama telling me it would be mine someday. What else do you remember about your mother's final months? Marco asked gently. I tried to think back, but the memories felt strangely vague, like trying to remember a dream. She was sick. We spent a lot of time together. She taught me recipes, told me stories about her childhood in Colombia. Elena, Marco said quietly, according to your mother's medical records, she was unconscious for the last 6 weeks of her life. You couldn't have had those conversations. The words hit me like a physical blow. What are you saying? I'm saying that someone implanted false memories, Marco said. Someone wanted you to believe that the bakery was your inheritance, your connection to your mother, something worth protecting at all costs. I thought about the way I'd fought to stay in the bakery, the way I'd refused to be moved to safety, the way I'd insisted on being part of the plan to stop the Torinos. Someone wanted me to be exactly where I was when you needed help, and they wanted you to care enough about that place to make the choices you made, Marco agreed. But who? And why? Before Marco could answer, footsteps echoed through the church. We both turned to see a figure approaching from the shadows near the altar, a woman, middle-aged and elegantly dressed, with silver hair and eyes that were disturbingly familiar. Hello, Elena, she said with a slight accent that might have been Italian. It's time we talked. Marco tensed beside me, his hand moving toward what I now realized was a concealed weapon. Who are you? The woman smiled, and something about that smile made my blood run cold. I'm family, she said simply. Elena's family, to be specific. That's impossible, I said. My mother is dead, and I don't have any other family. Your adopted mother is dead, the woman corrected gently. But your biological family? Well, we've been watching over you for quite some time. The church seemed to spin around me. Adopted? Elena Maria Torino? The woman said, and the name hit me like a lightning bolt. Daughter of my late brother, niece to the current head of the Torino family. You disappeared 15 years ago during a kidnapping attempt that went wrong, and we've been looking for you ever since. I stared at her, my mind reeling. Torino, the family that had been trying to kill Marco, the family we've been planning to move against. You're lying, I whispered. The memories you have of growing up with Elena Rodriguez Martinez are real, the woman continued. She was hired to protect you, to give you a normal life until we could safely bring you home. But when she developed genuine affection for you, when she started to see you as her real daughter, well, things became complicated. Marco's voice was deadly quiet. You're saying Elena is a Torino. I'm saying Elena is the key to ending the conflict between our families, the woman replied. Her biological father and Marco's father arranged a marriage contract before either of you were born. A way to unite the families and the territorial disputes, create lasting peace. A marriage contract, Marco repeated, his voice carefully controlled. Between Elena and the heir to the Salvatore family, the woman confirmed. You, Marco, I felt like I was going to be sick. This is insane. This is business, the woman said matter-of-factly. Your disappearance 15 years ago prevented the marriage from taking place, which allowed the current conflict to develop. But now that we've found you ... now you want to use me to control Marco, I said. Now we want to use your marriage to create the peace that both families need, the woman corrected. Elena, you care about Marco, don't you? And he clearly cares about you. The attraction is genuine. We made sure of that when we arranged your first meeting. You arranged? I looked at Marco, seeing my own horror reflected in his eyes. The storm that night wasn't natural, the woman explained. Weather manipulation technology has come a long way in recent years. We needed to create circumstances that would force Marco to seek shelter, and we needed to ensure he would find it in exactly the right place. You engineered everything, Marco said flatly. We engineered the meeting, the woman corrected. Everything that happened after that, the attraction, the choices you both made, the way you fought to protect each other, that's all genuine. I stood up abruptly, needing to move, needing to think. So what now? You expect us to just get married? Live happily ever after? Pretend that our entire relationship isn't built on lies and manipulation? I expect you to consider the alternative, the woman said calmly, which is a war between our families that will destroy both of them and kill everyone you've come to care about. Marco rose and moved to stand beside me, his presence solid and reassuring even in the face of everything we'd just learned. There's another option, which is, We end both families, Marco said quietly. We take down the Torinos and dissolve the Salvatore organization. We walk away from all of it. The woman laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. Oh, Marco, you really think it's that simple? You think you can just walk away from who you are, what you were born to be? I think, Marco said firmly, that Elena and I get to decide who we want to be going forward, even if that decision gets everyone you care about killed? The woman asked. Anthony, Vincent, all the people who depend on your family for protection. You'd sacrifice them for your personal happiness? I saw the conflict in Marco's eyes, the terrible weight of responsibility he'd been carrying his entire adult life. There has to be another way. There is, the woman said. Marriage, alliance, peace. Built on lies, I said. Built on necessity, the woman corrected. Elena, you've seen what this conflict has cost. Your bakery destroyed, innocent people put in danger, violence spilling into places where it doesn't belong. Do you really want that to continue? I thought about Mrs. Chun, about the other small business owners on my block who'd been caught up in something they didn't understand, about the customers who came to my bakery every morning looking for a moment of peace and normalcy in their complicated lives. What guarantees do we have? I asked quietly. If we agree to this ... arrangement, what assurance do we have that both families will honor the peace treaty? The marriage contract includes very specific terms, the woman replied. Territorial boundaries, profit-sharing arrangements, dispute resolution protocols. It's all been worked out in detail. And if we refuse? The woman's expression hardened. Then the war continues. And escalates. And doesn't end until one family or the other is completely destroyed. Marco and I looked at each other, both processing the impossible choice we were being offered. Marriage based on manipulation and family politics, or war that would destroy everything and everyone we cared about. How long do we have to decide? Marco asked. 24 hours, the woman replied. After that, Carlo assumes Elena is lost to us permanently and moves forward with more permanent solutions to the current conflict. She turned to go, then paused and looked back at me. Elena, I want you to know your biological father loved you very much. He never stopped looking for you, never stopped hoping you'd come home. This marriage contract wasn't just about business for him. He genuinely believed it would give you a good life with someone worthy of you. And now? Now he's dead and it falls to Carlo to honor his wishes, the woman said. But Elena, Carlo has much less patience than your father did. If you refuse this arrangement, he won't just start a war. He'll make sure it's a war that destroys everything both of you have ever cared about. Then she was gone, leaving Marco and me alone in the candlelit church with the weight of an impossible decision. Elena, Marco said softly. Don't, I said, holding up a hand. Just give me a minute to think. But thinking felt impossible. Everything I believed about myself, about my life, about my relationship with Marco had been turned upside down in the space of an hour. I was Elena Torino, daughter of the enemy, promised in marriage to a man I'd fallen for without knowing any of this existed. Do you believe her? I asked finally. About which part? About the marriage contract. About this being the only way to prevent a war. Marco was quiet for a long moment. I believe that Carlo Torino is capable of escalating this conflict to the point where innocent people get hurt. I believe that my family has resources and obligations that make walking away complicated. And I believe ... What? I believe that regardless of how we met, regardless of what brought us together, what I feel for you is real, Marco said firmly. Elena, if we do this, if we go through with this marriage, it won't be because of some contract signed before we were born. It'll be because we choose each other, even knowing that our entire relationship started as a manipulation. Even knowing that, Marco confirmed. Elena, every relationship starts with some combination of chance and choice. Maybe ours started with more engineering than most, but everything that's happened since that first night ... that's been us. Our decisions, our feelings, our choices. I looked around the church at the stained glass windows depicting saints and miracles, at the altar where couples had exchanged vows for hundreds of years. Is this what you want? A marriage that's partly a business arrangement? I want you, Marco said simply. However we make that work, whatever complications come with it. I want to build a life with you, even if that life comes with obligations to families and organizations we can't control. Even then, Marco said. But Elena, the decision has to be yours. If you can't live with the reality of what we'd be agreeing to, if you need something different, what would happen to you if I said no? I asked. If I decided I couldn't handle the family politics and the arranged marriage aspects? Marco's expression grew grim. War and probably death eventually. Mine, Anthony's, Vincent's. A lot of people who don't deserve to pay for my choices. And what would happen to me? I don't know, Marco admitted. But, Elena, I won't let anyone force you into something you don't want. Marriage, family obligations, any of it. Whatever you decide, I'll support. I walked to the front of the church and stood before the altar, thinking about choice and obligation, love and duty. The ways that sometimes the best decision wasn't the one that made you happiest, but the one that caused the least harm. Marco, I said finally. Yes? I turned to face him, seeing the man I'd fallen for despite everything, the careful strength, the hidden vulnerability, the sense of honor that made him willing to carry impossible burdens without complaint. Ask me, I said. Ask you what? Ask me to marry you, I said. Not because of some contract signed before we were born, not because it's the only way to prevent a war. Ask me because you want to spend your life with me. Marco stared at me for a moment, then moved to stand in front of me, his dark eyes serious and full of love. Elena, he said quietly, will you marry me? Will you build a life with me, deal with whatever complications come our way, be my partner in everything that matters? Yes, I said without hesitation. Yes, I'll marry you. Marco kissed me then, soft and sweet and full of promise, and for a moment, it didn't matter that we were standing in the middle of a political minefield. For a moment, we were just two people who'd found each other and decided to hold on no matter what. When we broke apart, Marco rested his forehead against mine. You know, this isn't going to be easy. I know, I said, but Marco ... Easy isn't always what matters. Sometimes what matters is finding someone worth fighting for. And is that what this is? Worth fighting for? I looked at him, really looked at him, taking in every detail of his face, thinking about everything we'd been through together, all the ways we'd supported and protected and challenged each other. This is everything worth fighting for, I said. Marco smiled, and in that smile, I saw our future complicated, challenging, but fundamentally built on the choice to love each other despite everything working against us. So what now? I asked. Now we go home, Marco said. We plan a wedding that's ours, not something dictated by family politics. And we figure out how to build a peace that both families can live with. Home, I repeated, testing the word. Wherever we are together, Marco said. That's home. As we walked out of the church together, hand in hand, I thought about the journey that had brought us to this point. A woman with false memories and a man carrying impossible responsibilities, finding each other in the middle of a storm and deciding to weather whatever came next together. It wasn't the love story I dreamed of as a little girl. But it was real and it was ours and it was worth fighting for. And tomorrow we'd start building the life we wanted to live. _ 3 months later. I stood in the kitchen of our new bakery larger than my old one, in a better neighborhood, with security measures that were invisible but comprehensive pudding, the finishing touches on the wedding cake I'd spent the last week perfecting. The bakery had reopened to great fanfare, with lines of customers that stretched around the block and reviews that praised everything, from the quality of the pastries to the warm, welcoming atmosphere. What the reviews didn't mention was that the woman behind the counter was Elena Torino Salvatore, and that the peace treaty signed at her wedding had ended a territorial conflict that had been simmering for decades. It's beautiful, Marco said from the doorway, still in his suit from the morning's business meetings, but with his tie loosened, his sleeves rolled up. It's our cake, I said, stepping back to admire the 3-tier creation decorated with sugar flowers and delicate piping. For our wedding, tomorrow. Tomorrow, Marco repeated, moving to stand behind me, his arms circling my waist. Are you nervous? Terrified, I admitted. But not about marrying you. About everything else, the families, the politics, the expectations, ... double quotes. The families love you, Marco said, pressing a kiss to the side of my neck. Anthony thinks you're the best thing that ever happened to me. Vincent keeps asking when you're going to teach him to bake. And even Carlo has admitted that you've exceeded his expectations. And your expectations? Marco turned me around in his arms, his dark eyes warm with love and laughter. You've exceeded everything I ever dreamed of wanting. I kissed him then. tasting coffee in the future and the promise of a life built on choice rather than obligation. When we broke apart, both of us were smiling. So what comes after tomorrow? I asked. Tomorrow we officially unite two families and end a war, Marco said. The day after tomorrow we start figuring out what peace looks like. And after that? After that, Marco said, we live happily ever after. I laughed. You really think it's going to be that simple? I think, Marco said seriously, that happiness isn't simple. But it's possible. And Elena ... With you, I believe anything is possible. Outside, the city moved with its usual rhythm, people heading home from work, couples meeting for dinner, families gathering for evening routines. Normal life carrying on as it always did, unaware that tomorrow would mark the beginning of a new era of peace in their neighborhoods. But inside our bakery, in the warm circle of Marco's arms, with the scent of sugar and vanilla and fresh bread surrounding us, the future felt bright and full of promise. We'd started with a storm and a stranger seeking shelter. We'd survived manipulation and violence and the revelation that our entire relationship had been engineered by people with their own agendas. But we'd also found something real in the midst of all that chaos. Something worth fighting for, worth building on, worth choosing every day for the rest of our lives. And tomorrow we'd make it official. Tomorrow we'd start our happily ever after. But tonight we'd finish our cake, close our bakery, and go upstairs to the apartment we'd made our own. Tonight we'd be simply Elena and Marco, two people who'd found each other in the storm and decided to weather everything that came after together. And that was more than enough. That was everything.